the only local radio talk show offering you the chance to ask your questions and express your opinions. From around your block to around the world, The Art Lewis Show is on 100.5 and 790 WSGW and online, WSGW.com.
Good morning to you and welcome. Welcome back to another edition of the Art Lewis Show here on WSGW. Just a look ahead this morning. Later on, after the 10 o'clock news, we're going to have open phones to get your reaction to the Mueller testimony yesterday. And at 11 o'clock on Focus, pianist extraordinaire Kevin Cole will be paying us a visit. But for this hour, we're going to spend a little time talking about the City of Saginaw, and we're going to do that with its city manager, and we say good morning to Tim Morales. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ar. How are you?
We're doing well, thanks, and thanks for joining us this morning. So let me start with an overview. If I were to say to you, Tim, from the day you took office as city manager till today, what's the difference in the City of Saginaw?
I think there are a lot of factors there, and the three that that I would really focus on is development in the downtown and old town businesses, crime reduction, and budget stabilization.
All right, let's take the last first because everything revolves around the budget. Mm-hmm. You mentioned budget stabilization. Of course, this is probably the only city in America that is strapped with a tax cap that's both limiting on the amount of millage and the amount of dollars that you can collect. Can we survive in that kind of an environment going forward?
Well, I think we've done a good job, and it's been a team effort with a lot of departments in the city, as well as working with the unions and retirees. Our primary source of revenue, because of the limiting tax cap, is actually income tax. Which is unique for cities in Michigan, but we do a good job with that, and that's why development and increasing the number of residents in the city is important, because that's how we can increase revenue here.
So let me clarify, get some clarification on that, because it's always confused me a little bit. The tax cap limits not only the amount of millage, but the amount of dollars collected. But does that only refer to the millage portion? In other words, there's no limit on the amount of income tax you can collect?
That's correct. The tax cap limits property tax collected to the amounts at the time it passed in the 70s. So for property taxes, we can only collect $3.8 million a year or 7.5 mils, whichever is less. Income tax, there is no limit on the amount you can collect. So the more jobs that we can generate in the city, the better we are. And that goes hand in hand with reducing some of our other costs as well. And that's striking that balance there.
There also seems to be, though, an interesting conundrum there in the fact that the more jobs mean more buildings and more businesses and more people, which would then necessitate more services, police, fire, and the usual. It is kind of a real, it's like sitting on top of a rubber ball, isn't it?
Yep, yeah, it's a real balancing act. So we always have to look at that, and our police chief and fire chief and development people all consider that, and we have to look at new developments and what might be required. The benefit we have there is we've had unfortunately, we've had a significant decline in population probably over the last 50 years or so, but that means that we are built out to be a much larger city, so we do have infrastructure available for water and sewer, and we have fire stations spread out through the city, so we could change our service model. So if we generate enough money, then we can provide those services. The issue, statewide, the issue for most cities, counties, and a lot of townships even is the future pension and OPEB costs. So that becomes a real balancing act.
All right. The other issue, I think Flint probably is the prime example. It's a pay me now or pay me later with infrastructure, isn't it?
Yep, it is, and that's across the country. You can look at state infrastructure, local government, national infrastructure, and I think that has been a space where government really hasn't invested a lot of money over the years to shore that up. The one area where I think Saginaw's done a really good job in that, and I do think we're improving in streets and other areas too, but our water and wastewater treatment facilities are top notch, and they've done an excellent job at maintaining and improving those systems.
What about the pipes delivering that service? Is Saginaw in any way the same kind of city that Flint was in terms of delivering to homes? Do we have lead pipes? Lots of them?
Well, we do have a number of them. We have our plan in place with the new lead and copper rules to deal with those. It's going to be a long-term project for the city, but we also know that our testing results are not the same as they were in some other cities. So we never really had high hits. We were on a low monitoring level because of the treatment that we do at the plant and the management that we have there. We have an excellent staff.
So let's go back now to some of the other things you talked about in terms of pensions and the cost of pensions to not only Saginaw but almost every other community that has like contracts with their employees. First of all, are we moving away from a defined benefit system more to a 401k model or something along those lines?
Yes, definitely, and I think most local units have already done that. Saginaw did that in the early 2000s. We moved to a defined contribution plan, which is similar to 401k, and we recently modified that to be a hybrid plan, which does have some pension level in it. However, it's a set level, so the city's cost does not increase. So we've done a good job with that change, and then we know what kind of money we're going to be laying out because it's a percentage of our payroll. Now we're just dealing with everything before that change.
And that, and the reality is that eventually the liability of defined pensions will go away as former employees pass on. But for now, though, how are you doing in terms of funding the pension liabilities?
We're, I think, pretty similar to a lot of other communities, ranging from, I think, 55 to 60% in the last several actuarial valuations, which is pretty similar to other communities in Michigan and probably throughout the country. But that's another statewide issue. The same with retiree health care. So at some point, it's going to be something that I think we're going to have to work with the state of Michigan and say, well, how do you address these issues long term if it becomes problematic for a number of cities? And the cities that usually have the biggest issues with that are your urban core legacy cities that have been providing services for years and years. Cities like Saginaw and Detroit, you saw, and Flint and Lansing and Grand Rapids and some of those other cities that you have pretty significant costs related to that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that other gremlin in the room, healthcare. Mm-hmm. In this day and age with the uncertainty surrounding healthcare, how do you plan for it?
That's a good question because, we can't foresee what will happen at a national level if there's ever going to be any changes in that. So we operate as if our plans will be in place. The City of Saginaw did eliminate retiree health care in 2009 and moved to health savings plans, so that stopped the accumulation of those future benefits, but you still have everything for employees hired before 2009. I will say that the retirees and the city worked together and came up with a plan to reduced the costs for retiree health care a few years ago, and we were able to save $2 to $3 million a year on that. That cost, unfortunately, that goes right back into the plan. So we did establish a healthcare trust fund this year. City Council passed that, and we set that up with MERS. So we are putting aside funds, future funds for those costs, and right now we pay as you go, and we haven't had an issue with that, but that's always looming out there, the same as the pension costs. So long term, I think you have to look at what are options at stabilizing those costs, and it may be something where we all get together at a statewide level and try to come up with solutions.
All right, we got to take a break, so hang on. We're talking to Tim Morales, the city manager of the City of Saginaw. We will return with more after these notes. And we're back with you on the Art Lewis Show at 9:27. My guest, Tim Morales, city manager of the City of Saginaw. We had a question, Tim, from a caller who wanted to know about the Behringer Building and if there's any progress to find a tenant or to renovate it.
The Behringer Building was owned by the Saginaw Economic Development Commission. They do have a development agreement in place with a development group, and I think they are currently in a review process. So it looks positive in my view, but they do have, I believe, 2 years in that process to decide whether they want to move forward or not. But I think from what I hear, everything looks positive at this point.
And, you know, the downtown has changed radically over the last, say, 10 years, hasn't it? I mean, with the addition of some of the Shaheen properties along Washington and Bancroft and all of these things, it's been a real positive period of time for Saginaw, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sure has. I think even the Garber Building and those buildings are a little older than that, but even in the last 6 or 7 years between Old Town and Downtown, there's been over $50 million in new investment.
So what would you like to see? I mean, if we looked into the Morales crystal ball, what does the city of Saginaw look like 5 years from now?
I think we continue to have our development. I think there's a lot of potential downtown and in Old Town. Two pretty distinct areas. I think downtown with the addition of Delta College this year, and I think that they'll continue to grow that over the years. But that education can be a catalyst for other developments. We did see that with the CMU College of Medicine. I think the investment in the Bancroft and Eddy building, which was just over $7 million, could be directly related to the CMU medical campus. So I think Delta can have a similar kind of impact, and I think there's the potential there in downtown with the building you just mentioned, the Behringer Building. The Behringer Building, and also I think there's a lot of potential in the Huntington Bank Building, and I know that they're working towards that as well. Old Town, I think there's tremendous potential for additional residential growth and small business growth. So I think you have two distinct areas where you can hopefully keep that momentum up and continue to grow. And again, that, as we talked about earlier, can lead to potential property value increases, which, because of the tax cap, that doesn't increase the city revenue, but it does create jobs and new residents, which can increase revenue. So all of that can have a positive impact citywide. So I like the path that we've been going on, and I think working as a group with Saginaw Future and the developers to continue that is the best course of action.
Let me ask about one other building, and that's the Jacobson Building. Any progress in doing something with that?
Well, I don't have any updates on that building at this time. It is, I think, under local control now, so that's always a positive because it was owned by out-of-state owners for some time. I can say that the city is working on solutions to the old parking ramp that's there, and we've been looking at doing something with that ramp for some time. It has outlived its probably useful life. It was much older than I thought it was, and has lasted longer than the typical parking ramp built at that time. But at this point, we did review it, and the cost to repair that is fairly significant and actually higher than building a new ramp. So we're looking at solutions for that, and I think that will be significant for small business and some of the larger buildings downtown, because we do need to look at parking there. We have a lot more people downtown with Delta College and the SVRC, so that's something that it's a good problem to have, but we do have to address it.
And you mentioned SVRC. That's been a really unique and wonderful addition to downtown, hasn't it?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, it's something that we've seen in a lot of communities, that type of mixed use, but it hadn't been done here, and I think that's a phenomenal example. With the it serves, to my view, as similar to a small business or restaurant incubator on the first floor, as well as other shops. The city, Saginaw Economic Development Commission, did develop microloans to help those small businesses, the booths in the SVRC, start up. So we're very interested in helping entrepreneurs get set up there. So I think that's another approach where you're giving options to residents and visitors to the city, but you're also helping people start small businesses, and hopefully some of them can eventually move into a bigger building even.
All right, we're going to take a break, Tim. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about police and fire services, because they represent a huge hunk of the budget. We are doing that with Tim Morales. He is the city manager of the city. Back with you on the Art Lewis Show, and my guest is Tim Morales. He is the city manager of the City of Saginaw. Tim, I want to take a little deeper dive into two services the city provides: police and fire. I want to start with fire because that's kind of close to my heart. For many years ago, I was a firefighter, and I talked to Chris Van Loo a lot about it. The fire department had to reduce its size over the past number of years because of budget considerations, and reduce the fire stations. And they're below, as far as I understand, below the national standard of manning apparatus. Where are we going with it? Do you see a turnaround in the fire department budget at all?
Well, it's tied to the citywide budget, and I really don't like the idea of separating police and fire when we're looking at it as a whole. Both departments were decreased quite significantly. The police department was decreased by over 50 police officers a few years ago. The fire department was scheduled to be reduced at the same time by, I believe, 15 firefighters, but we did have two-year grants that allowed us to keep the staffing level the same. And then in the second round, we increased by 2 firefighters that were city employees. So we had the second round of the grant was for 13 firefighters rather than 15. So I think when we look at this, we look at what are the best solutions for police and fire in the city, and how do we address both issues as best as possible. When I look at the fire department individually, I think that the command staff there and the firefighters have done an excellent job.
Oh, I agree.
Even with the reduction, rather than the apparatus manning, I think we need to look at our response times, which are really, comparatively speaking, are pretty phenomenal, I think. So I think they do a great job. And then subsequently, we also have to look at we have had a significant reduction in fires in the city of Saginaw in the last 10 or 15 years, and a lot of that goes back to the blight elimination that we've done in the city. I believe our last count, we've torn down well over 1,200 blighted homes, and I'm sure you're aware that that was a source of a lot of fire issues for the city. So we have to look at the whole grouping and see where are we now and where do we go in the future. To go back to the money issue, I don't see a significant influx of dollars coming in where we could substantially increase staffing in either department. So then we start to look at, well, what's the best way to deliver service with the staffing that we have now?
And, and some of the things like the police department, for example, they gained a couple of officers because Covenant comes through with some funding, and outside sources come through with funding. But it doesn't put more people on the street necessarily. It just puts more people in the hospital, right? Well,
Covenant now, I think they're at four officers,
yeah.
And they are also adding a canine that they are paying for. So I think we're up to 5 with them, with an additional canine. And they are in the Covenant neighborhood, and Covenant did, I believe, primarily it is for the campus there, but and they're aware that if there is a call for additional service or if there is a call for backup by any officers, those officers will answer that call. So it is really an excellent community investment by Covenant Hospital, and we're appreciative of that. And I think you could see that I think that they're pleased as well, because we started with 2 and then we went to 4 and then we added the canine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an excellent partnership. But you're right, the only way that we really have increased on the police side is working with Covenant on those contracts or additional grants. Chief Ruth has done a great job with scheduling and staffing, but also leveraging those grants and his command staff as well. I mentioned at the city council meeting that the police department will be receiving this fall an award for victim services, which is something that years ago the department didn't necessarily focus on, but over the past 5 years they've made that a primary focus and worked with other groups in the county like the CAN Council and Community Mental Health to prioritize that. So those are kind of some of the ways we're changing, and we've seen that a reduction in fire. And to go back to fire too, the reduction in fires I don't think is just singly related to blight elimination. The fire department has put a lot of effort into fire safety and reduction through smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. And when they install those units, they take that as an opportunity to educate people on fire safety. So every time they're installing those units, one of the fire crews is in the home making suggestions to the homeowner or the other people who live there about how they can be safer in the home. And I think that's had a big impact as well.
Some communities have gone to this model, and I have to tell you that it's not my favorite, but I will ask you about it. What about the concept of a public safety officer as opposed to a police and a firefighter?
Well, I think you have that on the table in all communities. Is it necessarily the best option? I think you need to look at a lot more data to make that decision. So I don't know that that's the best option for the city of Saginaw, and it wouldn't necessarily be my first option, but I think it needs to be part of the discussion whether, and I don't see a primarily public safety department fully implemented like some cities have as being necessarily a good option for Saginaw, just because of the size of the city and the number of fires that we have and some other issues. But could it potentially be a supplemental force in the future? I think there's some potential there. And what I think the take we have to look at for public safety is, what about 10 years from now? What about 20 years from now? And so on. So maybe it's not a good solution now, but in 10 years, maybe you're even hit harder with OPEB or pension costs. So instead of reducing, what can be the best service you can provide with the dollars that you have available? So is there some combination there that can work, or are there other options too? Are there part-time police officers that could be implemented to do some services? Are there other overtime contracts? Are there part-time firefighters? So on, different things to look at, and I think that our departments have been open to looking at things and modifying the way that they're doing work. So when you look at that long-term approach, I think all that has to be on the table. And like you said earlier, eventually the OPEB and pension costs do go away. So how do you set up the city for 40 years down the line or more? So I think that looking toward the future and getting some of that analysis in place now is a good proactive way to move forward.
And it all goes back to the money, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
No matter what the topic is, it comes back to the budget and comes back to the dollars.
Exactly, yep.
So right now, you would say the city's in stable financial condition?
Yes, and I think that our bond rating was upgraded to just that. The last time we did that, I think it was stable or improving. When I started as city manager, 2013 was interim in October.
Right.
We were down to about $250,000 in fund balance. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that you have 15% at least of your general fund balance in reserve. Our general fund is around $30 million. Ranges anywhere from 30 to 34 depending on the year. But right now we have over $6 million in fund balance. So we've increased that annually since 2013, and right now we're at a good level for reserve. But those are our emergency funds that we have there, kind of the rainy day funds. But now when we get to that level, then I think we start to look at if we continue to be responsible in our budgeting and come in on budget or under budget, what do we do with those additional funds? Okay, we have built up our fund balance now to an acceptable level. So rather than continuing to increase that, what are some other things we can do? Well, we are including in the budget now that retiree health care trust fund, an allocation to that. So hopefully that creates a savings for us to use in future years to address some of those costs. We have been putting additional funds, allocating additional funds in our budget to the pension plan. So hopefully we'll improve that funding ratio, and that will reduce the future costs. Once you have that in there, then I think you move on to some capital issues. And you're aware our city hall was built in 1936, along with a number of our other buildings, and we could definitely use some improvements there in the city hall building, the fire stations, and the police headquarters as well.
Last question, because I know you have to go. If you were to end up with some surplus funding, any chance we're going to see the return of a recreation department in the city of Saginaw to handle the needs of youngsters in the city?
Well, I don't know if there will be a dedicated department. That went away, I think, a long time before I was in the city. But I think we're continuing to build partnerships with our parks that can kind of fill in with that. And that's where Saginaw has had to work with outside organizations to do a lot of operations in the city, care for parks and build new attractions in parks, pavilions, and et cetera. So can we assist other groups with recreational activities in our parks? And I think that's a yes. And we've seen the one of the most proactive ones is the Friends of Hoyt Park and their softball program that they run there. The city does assist them, but primarily that's a private organization that does fundraising, and they also do, I know you're aware, they do the skating in the park and the house races and a number of activities, but that's primarily that private organization, and we help out where we can. And similar to that in Celebration Park with the splash pad and the skate park, and we're adding the fitness park, and we're hoping to partner with some other organizations on the fitness park to train individuals from that area to say, hey, this is how you use the park. Bring your people in to use it. Use the fitness park. We'll train you on the best ways to do, and you can have classes there or whatever you would like to do. So I think those are some of the ways we can do recreation. But again, I think when we look long term, 20 years down the line, potentially you could see some of those things come back as our OPEB costs reduce and pension costs reduce.
Well, Tim, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this morning. Long overdue. We keep talking about it. We finally did it. We'll have to do it again sometime. But thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you, Art. Appreciate it.
I look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Tim Morales, the city manager of the City of Saginaw, we thank him for joining us on the Art Lewis Show this morning.